So today we're going to try to answer the question, what is the significance of Jesus walking on water? And the way we're going to answer this question is through a method that is one of my favorite methods of Bible study, and that is to compare similar stories in the Bible with different scriptures found in the Bible, different books of the Bible telling the same story but from a different angle. And putting them together will reveal more of the bigger picture for us. So let's take a look at the scripture together. So I'll have the screenshot on my phone here, and I'm going to go to the Bible app, and we're going to go to John chapter 6. Okay, so the story of Jesus walking on water starts on verse 15 of John chapter 6, but we're going to change the version to the NIV version so that it's easier to read. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. So in the book of John, the miracle of Jesus walking on water is very, very generic. Um, the disciples are trying to row across a lake. Jesus comes in the middle of the night, walking on water. They're afraid. He tells them, "It is I, don't be afraid." They let him in the boat, and then they're at their destination immediately. So that's the details of the book of John. But the other versions of the same story fill in some of the details that may be missing from the book of John. So if you read the scriptures or this story from the book of John alone, you're going to miss a lot. Even though there's a lot of information in this story, as I will show later, you will see that there is more to the story than meets the eye. And I'll go ahead and continue because this story is also found in the book of Mark. So Mark chapter 6 reads, starting verse 45. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. So here we see that the book of Mark has a lot more detail than the book of John. And in this story, we see a little tidbit of a detail that the disciples were trying to get to a destination called Bethsaida. That wasn't mentioned in John. But the biggest detail that the book of Mark brings is in the verse 52, and that is where it says that the disciples were completely amazed because they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. So the book of Mark is connecting the story, a previous story before, about Jesus feeding the 5,000, and Mark is making a connection between that story and Jesus walking on water. So they were afraid, because the disciples did not understand about the loaves, the miracle of the loaves, or the feeding of the 5,000. So that is a very interesting insight and something that to keep in mind, to realize that what is it about the feeding of the 5,000 that is related to Jesus walking on water. The scriptures is telling us that the disciples did not understand what that meant, and that's the reason why they were afraid of him when he walked on water. So that's very interesting. So now to close it up, we're going to look at the story, at the same story told from the book of Matthew. Matthew 14, starting verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out to Jesus, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So we see that Matthew has even greater detail than the previous two Bible chapters that we read. And in here, we actually see that when Jesus comes and approaches the disciples, Peter is the one who asks Jesus to come out to meet him, to walk on water and meet him in the middle of the lake. And as we know the story, Peter actually begins to walk on the water and he sinks. But after Peter sinks, he cries out to Jesus, who immediately reaches out his hand and lifts Peter up out of the water. And Jesus brings him to the boat with him and rebukes him for his lack of faith. But when Jesus reaches the boat, we have a different detail. Another detail is not found in the other books, and that is the disciples worship Jesus. And they worship him as the Son of God. And this is very interesting. This is the first time at least in the recorded Gospels, where we see the disciples worshiping Jesus as God. And this is the significance of Jesus walking on water. Now, I would like to connect this text with another text that the disciples recognized Jesus as being God from another text that's found in the Old Testament. And it's found here. Let's go to the book of Job, chapter 9, and verse 8. It says, "He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea." That he being obviously God, which is mentioned here in verse 2. "Indeed, I know that this is true, but how can mere mortals prove their innocence before God?" And the word God here is the word Elohim in Hebrew. So here in verse 8, that he is referring to God, Elohim, who alone stretches the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. So here we see that Jesus walking on water is a demonstration of a characteristic of God. So God alone can walk on water. And the disciples recognized that, and that's why they worshiped him. But going back to the phrase in Mark that pointed back to the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, that too the disciples should have recognized that Jesus is God. And I will show you that from an Old Testament passage found here. So Psalms 145, starting in the middle of verse 13, it reads, "The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises, and faithful in all he does. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing." So the fact that the disciples knew that Jesus had only 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed a multitude of at least 5,000 men, not counting women and children, which would have brought the multitude to probably somewhere around 15,000. 5 loaves and 2 fish. And you're going to feed around 15,000 people and still have food left over afterwards to gather. According to scripture, it says 12 basketfuls of food left over. The disciples apparently didn't get into their mind that God was in the midst of them. In fact, that feeding of the 5,000 is the demonstration that Jesus is in fact Emmanuel, God with us. And he was there in the middle of them, among them, caring for their needs, caring for their hunger, with basically nothing. It's amazing. But I'm not too hard on the disciples because we're the same way. Sometimes we see the miracles of God straight in our face. God is trying to get our attention, and we somehow miss it. The big miracles that He's doing for us, and we just kind of we're too dull and too blind to see it. So anyway, Mark pointed out the connection between that miracle, the miracle of the feeding of 5,000, with Jesus walking on water, that they're one and the same, and they're basically pointing at the fact that Jesus is Emmanuel. He's God with us. Jesus is God. And that's why he was worshipped on the boat by the disciples, because they finally got it. They understood, oh, this is truly the Son of God. This is Emmanuel, God in the flesh. But their hearts were hardened to the idea that a mere human could be God. So this is again the problem that the Jews had because of their understanding of who the Christ was. The Christ was to be a human being, not God. So this concept of God becoming human was completely foreign to them, and the disciples were they were not immune to this to the idea either. And this is a belief that the Jews continue to have to this day. So, but in reading this scripture, this in this way, it led me to find out. Well, is this really what the message of the scripture is saying? So, can we actually see something that actually hints at the fact that Jesus is God? And so I dug a little deeper. And what I did instead is use another tool that I use often. It's called the Blue Letter Bible, and I'm going to show it here on the scripture. So I decided to look at the same texts in the original Greek to see if there's any kind of a hint that points to this reality that Jesus is God. So let's take a look at that. So this is another application that I like to use, a really good tool It's called the Blue Letter Bible. So we open the application here, and we're going to go and look at the passage in John chapter 6. John chapter 6. And that's found here. Okay. And in doing some research, I found the verse 20 very curious. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So clicking on this verse, clicking on the interlinear concordance, we get the actual Greek text that's found. And see the verse where it says, "It is I," or "I, it is." So the Greek word here is ego, which is, I highlighted right here. Ego. And that means I. But then when you click back, and I skipped on this one, but I need to go back. If you click back to the other part where it is a me, which is this word, a me. Okay? So what's great about this tool is that it allows you to see where this word is used anywhere else in scripture, that uses this word. And you can, based on the context of the uses of the word, you can come with your own conclusions as to what this word actually means. So doing that, I kept looking at some other passages and look at where I landed. So if we go here to the instances where this word is used, go to John 8 here. And under John 8, we see this John 8:58. "Most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." So that phrase "I am" is ego eimi, which is the word that we just noticed there. So here, the same word that is used, Jesus used in the Greek, "it is I," is actually ego eimi, which is the same word that is actually used here where Jesus declares to himself to be the I am of the Bible. So opening this app, we can check the actual passage in the app. So we go to John 8:58 in the Blue Letter app, and then click on the interlinear concordance to look at this passage. And here we see, okay, so before Abraham was, ego eimi. So notice the past tense here, ginomai, according to the root word, a prolongation and middle voice of a primary verb. So to become, come into existence, begin, to become, to arise. So looking at the word ginomai, how is used in scripture, we could probably translate this passage as before Abraham came to be, or before Abraham became, I am. Ginomai is different from eimi. As we can see, there's ginomai, which is translated was, and eimi, which is I am or am, the present tense. So it's two different words. So this text cannot be translated as before Abraham was, I was. It has to be I am. So here is clear indication that Jesus is claiming to be the I am present tense of the Bible. This is the great I am that spoke to Moses in the burning bush. If you remember that story in Exodus. So here is Jesus claiming himself to be I am. I am, the I am of the Bible is here. Don't be afraid. I thought that this was awesome. So using this tool called the Blue Letter Bible allows you to see some of these beautiful nuggets that you probably wouldn't be able to see it from the English translation, from any English translation that you come across.